Cool. It's live. Does it mean it's working?
Yes.
I think so.
I hope so. Okay.
Boy.
So there's like what, 6 questions?
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So question 1, based on assigned readings, define fairness. Define fairness.
Okay, you're just okay. You're just
That's that one question.
Oh, I was waiting for you to read the rest of the question, but my bad.
It's like
No, because there's so many mini questions within the question. It'll take forever.
That's very good. Kennedy?
sure. So yeah, like so through the ratings and stuff like that, like the Harvard one. So I think like fairness was basically like people have to basically understand and feel like they're included and stuff and things like that. Basically, the processes that things take like in an organization. For example, like they give different examples, like when the organization went through pay cuts and stuff like that. For one organization, their vice president basically held a meeting for just only 15 minutes and just answered a few questions, and that was it throughout the whole process. Whereas another organization, the president of the organization was involved, and then I think their own session took like an hour and 30 minutes, I think, and then he actually spent more time, answering questions and making employees understand like how sorry they were about the whole thing and things like that. So basically, people actually felt like, the organization, cared about their well-being and things like that. So to them, the process was fair. So I think that was a good explanation of, what fairness was in the whole sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that just being fair is like better than not having an explanation and still getting the same-ish benefits. People like to know what's going on instead of being, lied to, and then it makes their perceptions better of the organization or company itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because then they also mention like stuff like it's not just about the money, because like sometimes like organization would, like they said, like the organizations would throw money at the problems and try to provide different incentives and stuff like that, but it doesn't stop there. Like incentives is one thing, but at the same time, do people actually feel included in the process? Because if they don't, then there are so many ways that could backfire.
Yeah, and it's better than a cover up. Just
Cool. So the nerd I am actually Googled fairness, because fairness across our entire lives changes based on the situation, I feel like. So dictionary.com literally had the state, condition, or quality of being free from bias or injustice. I was like, that's very vanilla. But with like within the field, it felt like everybody had an equal chance to get to what they need. That to me would be fairness, if that makes sense.
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. List the drivers behind fairness processes and practices, and then compare fairness processes with fairness outcomes.
Yeah, I think the process, is definitely like how I explained, like the inclusion of people and things like that in different processes and things like that. Because then there's one thing like an organization just making a decision outright, and there's another difference within that decision that was made, that the employees were included in making those decisions. So like the outcomes will definitely be different. Like because like I think they give different examples of how only 1% of of the employees who felt that they were treated fairly actually came back and sued the company for wrongful termination, whereas 17% of those who thought like that they were treated unfairly actually came back and sued the company for wrongful termination. So like the outcome is definitely higher when the negative outcome or the negative consequences is definitely higher when employees feel like they were treated unfairly.
Yeah, I took mine from the flood article. So the fairness process, just that it measures. So if you're listened to or not, what concerns you raise, how they were responded to, like basically what feedback you get back from that too.
Yeah.
And then the outcome, it's just measured and like basically the same thing, like were they listened to in the perceptions, were they given like adequate like reasoning, and did they do all they could help to help you instead of just be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna help you, and really in actuality did nothing and just ignored the problem.
Go ahead.
Did you what?
What'd you say?
Nothing.
Was that a sneeze?
No.
Oh,
You can pretend it was though. That's fine.
okay.
It works.
Well, bless you.
Well, thank you.
Oh boy.
Okay, so when I looked at the flood article you were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
it was the one by Adger, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Quinn and
I found at the bottom that it said that fairness relates to the willingness to act. So I guess that could fall under like that first question that we just covered.
mm-hmm.
And like the perceptions of fairness in general is critical to individual action, because if there's no trust relationship between the citizens and the states that they live in, how can they have that reciprocal relationship to feel like, well, if the citizens don't do their job, or if they feel like they're vulnerable in something like a flood, then they'll have that reassurance that the government or the state will be there to back them up, and then vice versa. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Cool. Okay. Using examples from hazard mitigation studies conducted in the United Kingdom, position yourself towards the statement in that article on page 1080, which is like page 2. Fairness matters because, among other things, it affects intentions, behavior, and the legitimacy of state and social society relations. I can't talk. Can't even read, so this will be fun.
I mean, basically what I'm going off of what I said before about fairness matters. It really does. The flood, the resources, they want to make sure they were distributed to those who needed them the most, and that they could help the public. And I guess with this, I basically base off part of the next question with Katrina, like they really ignored them completely, totally disrespected like their society and the relations, because they thought they were a trashy state or whatever they said Louisiana was. It definitely just affects overall relationships after the fact between the community and the state, which would go against the legitimacy of state and then society relations.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, huh?
What?
Did you say something?
No.
Oh, now I'm hearing things. It's awesome.
Oh, yeah, I like put my hand up, but that's just.
And Kennedy's dying, so everything's okay. This is the semester we've had.
I got sick.
It really just comes down to the more people you have, the more resources that you're going to need. Because if you've got a population the size of Texas, you're not going to need the amount of resources that Connecticut would get, or Rhode Island, if you really want to go that far. It could fit inside Beltway 8. It's tiny. I know. It's where I'm from. Okay.
Yeah.
However, it also kind of depends on the citizens themselves, because down here we're going to need flood insurance probably a lot more than they would up there, because there really isn't much for the water to go except for into the ocean.
Yeah.
That does us no good up here in Huntsville or Conroe.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think like how like the state responds to like after like a disaster or something like that definitely goes along with, right? And then people know like they actually handle things fairly also goes along with, because then that will show how the communities are more involved in the government's initiatives and things like that. Because then if not, people will start withdrawing from government initiatives.
Yeah, that's definitely a great point.
Ready to move on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Question 2. Explain complex consequences of lack of transparency and fairness at different levels of public leadership during and after the response to Katrina with relevant examples.
Okay, so I mean, for Katrina, especially in Louisiana, that's what I meant to say. They're being viewed as a corrupt state, and that really affected the response from state and federal assistance. I know they received like way less funding than they needed to. A lot of people were suffering, had slower redevelopment after Katrina, and yeah, fairness just wasn't there, and it was really really relevant.
Yeah, and I think the transparency part also played like a major role because like agencies weren't coordinating with each other, like the federal and the state levels and stuff like that. So basically, like they were basically duplicating what could have been shared and stuff like that, sending people to like hospitals that were already packed because other agencies were sending people there and things like that. So there was a lot of closed niche stuff and like the open data initiative by that was started by President Obama to try to get agencies to share information and be more open about non-classified information on the website, but still that wasn't the case and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it said somewhere in the article that the Mississippi governor was treated and looked at differently than the mayor and the governor for Louisiana. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that starts at the top and trickles its way down. So, if the top is corrupt and looks ugly, then obviously the rest of the system is going to have that appearance, even when it may not be. So, like the quote from the article was like, "The fish rots from the head down." So, obviously, to me, it applies here completely because some of the quotes that were pulled from the people that were interviewed
Mm-hmm.
On page 357, it was like that basically other people were pointing the finger at the mayor and like saying how the poorest residents caused the costliest problems and who let those people back in. It was the mayor. So obviously everything had to fall back on him and it was his fault because he could control under a whole other population of people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the initial reactions with the resources was like, why should we help a city that doesn't appear to want to help themselves? And they're basically falling victim to what they've created. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that that quote about the fish rots from the head is a very good example because, like, when you think about it from an organizational sense, right? People buy into organizations' missions because, like, if the president or CEO of the organization, for example, it is from those levels or higher level of the visions of the company and the mission, come about and stuff like that. They talk about what they look, what they want the vision to be for like the years to come and things like that. And then those are the things that people buy, not just people currently in the organization, but also people who hope to come to the organization and things like that. So if that is what is being transcended down, then that's what people will be acting upon and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, if it's obvious that the leader of the clan is not practicing what they're preaching, then that's just going to trickle down and it's not going to be good for anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, and with the fairness too, I mean, it's supposed to be social justice, and with that, definitely not. And then also another thing I think that goes with it is like not necessarily I can say like the racism part, but I mean for sure like you just hear studies all the time about Katrina and the social injustices. So I feel like that also played a role in like the overall fairness, and that needs to be one thing to be incorporated into like fairness at all levels of public leadership.
All right. And then explain how and which procedural justice and distributive justice processes affected behaviors of individuals in Galway and Cumbria, probably butchered it, after catastrophic flooding. So that was back to the article from question 1. Right?
Yeah, the flood.
Haha.
Wait, what
Yeah, the
question
fair
did you
flood
just
risk
read?
management.
What
Do what?
question did you just read? Was that number 2?
Yeah, it was the last part of number 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Explain how and which procedural justice and distributive justice processes affected behaviors of individuals in Galway and Cumbria after catastrophic flooding.
So I know.
Go.
Okay. I just know like after the article was talking about the distributive from the Maximilian rule, how like the most cost effective was the one that protects like the fewest people, and so with the flooding, it's just all about. I mean, it's not like the human part of it; it's more like the nature part, and so it was just the planning problems and everything, and really just the economic problems too. For flood risk management. And yeah, just going that, I mean, what it says on the distributive resources should be targeted to the most vulnerable. And so with the flood, I mean, yes, but really the location was like the main part that contributed to like the risk management.
Yeah, I mean, you can't live by water and not expect to get flood issues.
Yeah.
I did find in the abstract from the Adger and Quinn article about how they found that aspects of fairness is related to willingness to take adaptive action, but it varies within context and experience and knowledge of flooding. So, I mean, if you've got newbies that just moved to the water because they wanted to live by water and be relaxed, they're probably not even thinking about, oh, what if our house floods? What if we can't live here anymore because it's now a bigger lake than when we moved here?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like a lot of people do. I mean, they don't really think about that. You know, there's some are excited to move into a new place, and then of course, like the realtors aren't going to be like, "Oh, you're on a flood, floodland or whatever you call it, floodplain." I forget. And yeah, that also goes back to like, I mean, like the sharing of like that information. You know,
Yeah,
people just don't think about it, and I mean, in some places, you know, they're not like protected by insurance, depending on how many times like the previous property has been flooded, right?
I think so.
Like after a while, I mean,
That's like adult language. I'm not there yet. Denim could probably answer that better.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, last part of question 2. What are the lessons for HSEM leadership based on the UK case study?
I think for that one, like some of the lessons learned were like basically like they needed to basically include people more in the decision making and make stuff more discussions other than just like outright decisions. So basically, like they they should make the discussion. So like for example, I think like it goes back to the sessions like where one of the sessions was 15 minutes and the other one was an hour and 30 minutes for one of the companies when they were cutting pays and stuff like that. So basically, to them, they should make those discussions more open and actually give people or employees or more a platform where they actually voice their concerns and be heard, and people actually feel like they're like the company care about them and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Great way to put it.
Because I mean, if you live in a community where the rules are made for you and they don't apply to you, you don't feel like your voice is being heard. Whereas if they're actually asking for your opinions, kind of like when you're voting on like what are they called? Not bonds, but you know what I mean?
Voting on
Like propositions and stuff for like the cities and the school districts.
Like deed rules too.
Yeah, those. So like if they probably feel like by including the population that they're serving, they have, whether they're been behind the scenes, the inputs taken or not, it's still the upfront, hey, we asked your opinion. Whether we took your opinion under consideration, that's behind closed doors. Y'all don't get to see that, which I mean, it's kind of shady, but
Yeah.
I think
And then
yeah, I think that's also a good example because then when you think about it too, from the perspective of how do you say, like synods and stuff like that would represent like certain communities and stuff like that. And it's like when they hold those like Senate hearings and stuff like that, and they ask them these questions and they voicing these opinions. In my head, I'm always like, how actually do they go about making sure like they're also taking into account what the people that they actually represent and want them to be asking and care about and stuff like that, or are those questions or concerns that they're voicing more based on what they're seeing by themselves, or is it actually being powered by what the community actually wants?
yeah, I mean, that could be even go up from a higher level, not just like the community city, but like the White House or like Congress and the senators up at that level. If they don't actually take into account what's going on in their home states, how can they actually truly represent their home states?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely relates to like the open sharing of information too. I mean, if something's like prone to something, you're not going to hide that information. I mean, at least you shouldn't. And I know like not specific examples, but I can see like people like hiding something and then letting it happen and then gaining money from it.
Yeah.
Like if like something bad is there, just like, oh, let it happen. We'll like repair it later and get the money. I guess I kind of like use that to relate to like fairness and stuff.
I can see that.
Yeah, like moving into a new house and they're like, oh yeah, this is great. Really, they built something not as good as they could have, but then knowing that they're gonna have to like fix it later, and be like ask for more money to fix it or something.
Yeah, or they bought a house from like Ireland that got really flooded during Harvey, and nobody told them it was flooded before. And look, there's mold in the walls.
Yeah. There we go.
That's bad.
That's a great example.
I'm just trying to get real life examples. I'm sorry. Okay, you guys good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Question 3. Explain what are the strategies for systematic fairness process development and dissemination that were listed in HBR. So I don't remember seeing anything about HBR. I could be totally blind.
I think that's the Harvard's Business Review.
Yeah. The piece by Brockner on page 43 to 58 had a title of Why It's So Hard to Be Fair. So I feel like that kind of fit in with fairness. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think this was from the article. It might have been from a different one, but I remember they so some strategies for systematic fairness. I mean, to interview the managers below senior management, and then this says from there to interview roughly 100 employees from different parts of the company to learn about the organizational strengths, and then from there that can facilitate strategy implementation.
Oh yeah, that was in the Harvard's Business Review. Yeah.
Was that and then to also work in the creative endeavors in order to understand how work environments foster or impede creativity and innovation. So that would just go along with making sure that fairness, like process development, is fair throughout like the company and not just higher management, but throughout. And that's why I'm sure they said to do managers from below senior management.
No, I agree with that because I think by capturing because within an organization, right? I think capturing their mid people is very important because then those people have been at the organization for a while. They're like kind of seasoned employees, if you were to say. So in that sense, you're taking them. They're not so higher level up and they're not so lower level up. So they've been to the lower level up. They're rising to the higher level. So they basically would have an idea of how to relate better to people who are at the lower level, and they also understand what the higher level management expects from the organization and stuff like that. So when they do talk to the lower level employees or the whole employees in the organization in general, they get a better sense of how to interact with them. Also, basically capture what the information that they're trying to gain. Because like I think when they do stuff like that, like how they were doing like the interviews and stuff like that, I think the organization was trying to understand how to implement strategies better and stuff like that. So I think through those points, like it's like you need to find employees that are more equipped or better situated to actually reach out to other employees and actually get the right information, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, with that, you also need to invest in training, because just because you can find people doesn't mean they actually are as good as they say on paper.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. And I remember seeing something about it, saying something about making process fairness a top priority.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously makes sense, because if it's not, then you might as well just run a monarchy and just go from there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I think like I remember reading something also regarding how some companies were providing things like on-site daycare and stuff like that for the employees, which is very important. Like those stuffs are good incentives that could bring people to work for your organization. But as much money you pay people, and as much comfortable you make them within an organization, one thing like fairness definitely matters a lot, right? Because they also gave like examples of how someone got passed up on promotion and stuff like that, right? So if one person gets passed up on promotion and someone else gets it, the other person is likely thinking, the person that got it, that they're more qualified than they are and things like that. So like the manager actually sitting down and explaining to them why the other person got the promotion is very important. And then also telling them what they could do in the future to help them get to that level and actually acquire that promotion is very important. Because then if you just leave things blank and just promote the other person without really explaining to the other person what is going on, as much money as you may pay them, they may become disengaged from the organization and not, help you fulfill your mission.
They'll just see a paycheck at that point.
Yeah, because then to them they feel like, because I think the reading also mentioned something like they will see the other person that got promoted as the manager's pet or something like that. So like they'll be like, oh, okay, that's fine. Like basically they'll feel like how do you say, like you picking preference of work or something like that. Like yeah, like you're friends with the boss or something like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
you also run the risk of going through the motions and not really caring about what's going on.
Yeah, and like I remember earlier in the Harvard Business Review, a few weeks ago, we talked about how like managers and leaders, whatever. So if they're like leaders, people are more likely to stay and get input and feedback. I think the feedback one from everybody, which also goes into getting opinions and not just doing it from one person, but getting like the whole picture.
Yeah. Okay. So explain how the strategy explained in the Nebel, Sharp, Danis, Tomey, and Knickerbocker 2014 article would ensure fairness in medical resource distribution planning. Basically, I found that it was a values-based framework, that it could be an ethical approach for strategic decision-making with the allocation of the scarce public health and medical resources, especially with the larger types of populations like the bigger states like Texas and California. It could provide the possible solution by providing a framework for a new system that would verify and protect resources based on a priority scale that was on page 8. I think that's an 8. I don't know. It looks like an 8. That they could also use the framework and the logic model. There was like two little, not graphs, but little pictures in the article that kind of laid everything out to make the decisions about the fair allocation of the resources, especially when something is in lower inventory or is scarce and it's of a high priority, even though there may not be as much of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just making sure the procedural values are fair, and then going through the fundamental ethical values as well when allocating the different areas for resources.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because I think like ethical values is definitely very much important to selling like in the medical field, because then also like you're dealing with human lives and stuff like that. So like definitely you need to make sure like the medical professionals are hold ethical standards. So just as police officers do in the same case, yeah.
Yeah, and then didn't part of the article mention about the scoring system?
I think so.
And like just
I don't know. They're all
also
kind
using
of
that for
together.
yeah, for like allocating different resources from that. And then as you mentioned, they could definitely use the system for not just like the medical resources, but other resources as well. Yeah, I know this may be off topic, but I remember one of my coworkers, like she has food stamps, has a lot of like 4 kids, but only 2 live with her now. And like the amount of money they get like each month is really crazy. It's like $25 or some like really low number. And it just like I was just like, wow, that's like really low. But then I also like looked it up sometimes. And I remember from social inequality class, like people have to live off of barely anything. And I feel like that goes directly in with like, the medicine too, and like help for that. So maybe yeah.
No, yeah,
Department,
that's a
whatever.
very good point. No, like yeah, like that's a very good point. Like that, like what you just said of them receiving probably $25 a month. Yeah, that actually gets me that worried thinking about how those funds is bust and stuff like that. Like is that being distributed? I would think that it's being distributed, equally and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I hope so, but yeah, like at the same time, I think that amount is very low, especially for someone with kids, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Ready to move on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Question 4. List obstacles organizations face when they consider process fairness implementation and link those to the 3 rules of fairness challenges discussed with respect to the mitigation planning of the River Thames.
I actually think like I came about like a lot of obstacles like the organizations would face when they actually try to implement it. When they're trying to implement fairness it was more like basically what would happen if they did not implement it in the sense like like basically facing like lawsuits and stuff like that, and then showing that they actually will lose more money in the sense like they do not implement it and stuff like that.
For sure. And then what part does it say? The 3 rules of fairness challenges discussed with the Thames River. Is that right, Thames? Those
Yes.
were
I don't know.
the procedural distributive ones with the equality and the maximize utility.
Yeah.
And the max, right? Okay. Yeah, I mean, basically just saying what Kennedy said. I mean, it's just all about, which is better, how much money will help people, but while the same thing, it's about, as I said before, like the most cost effective will help the less people. And then basically just with the location too, and then their vulnerabilities. I know it talked about a lot about the populations being vulnerable and who needs the most help.
Yeah. When I was reading through the article, I just came up with obstacles that they had kind of red flagged in a way. So they talked about like the budget, the materials that they could have needed to fix something or build something, the management of the funds or the jurisdiction that they could have if something was out of their league in a way, and they may not be able to fix it, even though they could have the ability to fix it. You can't force everybody to get the flood insurance, because if you did that, then it would open the door for like social inequality, and we're not being treated fairly. We're being forced to get something we may or may not need. And that it's almost basically impossible to construct an emergency management system or a plan to respond effectively to all of the floods when everyone is different. We can have a textbook in theory plan, but it's not gonna, it could just serve as like the foundation, not we need to do this, and this per every single flood, because it won't work. It won't happen.
Yeah. And definitely could we relate this to like the public and the private sector, like their what do you call it? Inconsistencies for like laws and stuff, and like, there are like regulations and their right to do this or not, and like whose job it would be,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think that's actually one of the lessons learned for the HSM leaders in one of the other articles, like them being consistent with the way like they do things and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it almost comes down to which principle of fairness or rule of fairness do they favor the most, and I think that's what's probably going to rule whatever's best for that community, because you can't apply to all three to one community. It may not work. It may just turn into a hot, fiery mess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because as much as you want to stay consistent, so like what works for one organization may not work for one organization, and same thing with employees and stuff like that. So you always have to, play around with the strategy a bit and try to adapt it to each situation.
Yeah, it's definitely a trial and error type of situation.
For sure. Especially if there's no like prior research or like incidents that happened on it, and you don't really know how it's going to end up.
Yeah.
Or how much it's going to like have an effect.
It's like trying to find out if something's going to catch on fire or not. You're not going to know it until it actually does. It's like, oh, that's the flames. That's the problem.
Horrible.
I'm just trying to, you know me, I'm very realistic. I need some examples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great one.
It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool. Okay, question 5. Yay, nay, yes, no.
Oh.
Okay. Evaluate the principal factors that prevented increasing transparency and sharing of data during the initiative called Open Data.
I think that one, like some organizations basically had like their own vision and things like that of the way they wanted to do things, and then it was kind of like colliding with like the directive of them sharing unclassified information on their websites and stuff like that. So they didn't follow the initiative, or they didn't follow the directive to actually do that. So basically, some of them like they weren't sharing information with each other, like the federal and the state departments, everything. They were all doing things differently.
Yeah, that falls under like the problem of the inclusion and the exclusion. It's like what could be important and needs to be included for some of them may not be to others, so they're going to exclude that, and everything just looks different, even though it could be saying the same thing.
Exactly, because they were basically duplicating processes and stuff like that, and those are the stuff like they could have merged together and did.
Yeah, because from then you can just get confused on what actually means what, and then you're spreading and diffusing the confusing information, and oh look, an entire population is confused. I wonder why.
Oh yeah, I agree, because like I think another example that they gave was how like they were sending people like to different hospitals, right? So basically they weren't coordinated with each other. So it's like they were sending people to hospitals that were already filled up, because then like for the federal, maybe they'll send people here and be like, yeah, go here, kind of stuff. But for them, they keep an account of how many people that they were sending there. But the state people do not know that, so they'll end up also sending people to the same place, only for people to get there and be like, wow, this place is filled up. Like, what is going on? So basically, the miscommunication and not being transparent and stuff like that, or sharing data in that sense, causes a lot of confusion, especially in an emergency situation where time definitely matters.
Yeah, I remember going back to the Katrina example, I know the collaboration was off, and I remember they sent a lot of people. I feel like it was to a hospital, and like there were like duplicates of sending resources or something, but that definitely has to do with it.
Yeah, wasn't there an issue with sending people to like what's that stadium called?
I know what you're talking. It's gonna bother me. The Superdome.
That one. And it was already overcrowded, and then you got a massive people that are completely upset, and they just don't understand why they were told to come here when there's nothing here.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. In what ways local HSEM leaders could foresee meeting similar challenges, and what strategies could they adapt to overcome those challenges?
I think from that standpoint of sharing data and stuff like that, right? So like already you already know like the challenges list and stuff like that. Like people like organizations don't want to share data and stuff like that. So I think like stuff like MOUs, like memorandum of agreements, and understand is better if you guys if they put it in place before those incidents do occur. So like there's already like a set of agreement on how data could be shared and stuff like that. Because I think the open data stuff was more like a directive that was given. And I think that's actually goes back to the fairness thing, like actually it's giving people reason. Because if you go back also to the video that we watched was basically asking people to ask more why and stuff like that. So basically, I think the directive that was given was more like a directive, but it wasn't actually taking that time, to basically explain and give people reasons why they should be doing this. So organizations were more reluctant to do that. So I think in the case like of these organizations already know like such challenges exist, they should basically work together to understand, what concerns that each other have, and then try to build that into memorandum of agreements and understanding, so that when disasters or emergencies do come about, they're able to share information more quickly and effectively and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I know one of like the negative sides too. I remember one of the articles talked about was the different agencies, they're like battling over like what kind of resources to share, and then like what they could use for like different things. Like the troops, I remember one time it mentioned that they were holding an internal discussion, and then with the open data, they were like, I guess, nervous or like scared to like share everything with that because it could be used among other agencies.
And
Yeah,
it could in the malform of things too. It couldn't always be for the good. It could harm some form.
yeah, because like every agency has their own mission, right? So like for them, they have their priority and things like that set. So for their priority may not be the same with another organization, or what they deem may be a risk may not be what another organization deems a risk. But each one has the reason for that vision, or that reason for saying what they're saying. So basically, like having that open communication of fairness definitely goes a long way. It's like he wants to be involved in this conversation.
I know. I want to say something.
He's like, wait, guys, I have something to say.
Yeah. Wait, let me chime in. What you got to say?
Just say, hey, it's bedtime. It's time to go to bed.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So with this, like, I was just thinking about the question, like, yeah, it'd be like great for something to be, standardized within the open data, but like, as I was reading, I still couldn't like about the strategies they could adapt to overcome the challenges. I mean, I couldn't find too much. Did y'all find something that could be used? I mean,
I didn't really.
They wouldn't be fighting over resources.
I really came up with more outside of our articles, just kind of thinking about it. Where if they had like a checks and balances system, I know it sounds really childish, but that's really what it comes down to. Because unless you've got somebody double checking things to make sure, oh, we sent too many people here, we need to not do that next time, or no, don't send those people here, we need to have them over there. That could also screen for the inaccurate or the misleading data within the data program. I wrote down something about reverse the mechanism to allow for a time version data set to have irrelevant data expire to be moved to a stockpile server. So instead of the stuff that doesn't mean much anymore just sitting there clouding up the space, where just move that over somewhere where you still might need it, but it's not on speed dial. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So still have it remotely close to this kind of thing, but yeah, not in front of you.
Yeah. And also kind of like we were kind of leading into getting rid of the one size fits all mentality, is just because something works for them during this one time doesn't mean it's going to work again for the same amount of people in a different time.
Yeah.
And kind of like what you were saying, Nicole, about how everything becomes a contest. Well, we have this information. I don't want to share it with you. I found it, not you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a toddler contest. It's my toy, not yours.
Right. And it kind of reminds me of like the whole like the race to the moon, or back in with the astronauts and everything. Yeah. But how like the Russians said everything and like, oh, I'm not going to share. We want to be the first to get to the moon. Yeah, just reminds me of that. Yeah, it's all about being selfish. But I feel like if they did like regulate the open data, the network, I mean the information would have to be, I mean, of course, reliable, and definitely used, for the better, for the good. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of hard to do, especially with the amount of different agencies we have, across state, local,
The alphabet.
federal. Like it's just, it's crazy.
And I think that's a good example. Now, so I think that's kind of like what goes back to all the reason why DHS was like all those agencies were imagined on the DHS, right? Because like then that idea of like this is ours kind of stuff, but then grouping all of them under one agency helps them understand like you're one, it's one mission that we all have to kind of stuff. Supposing to each of them on their own, because then again that there's so many ways things could go wrong.
Yeah. Just got to stand together as one nation.
Yep.
Leading into that, question 6 and final question 6. Explain the 3 components of the pluralistic approach to risk governance in England. So that goes back to the equality, the maximum rule, and the maximum utility. And then the challenges with merging all 3 of them. So like to me, merging all 3 of them, it needs to be beneficial to the nation. If it's not beneficial to merge them, then don't merge them. Obviously, red flag right there. It needs to ensure that all of the people at risk have an equal opportunity of having their risk managed by the state. And that the distribution of the resources should target those that are in the most vulnerable state. Because you don't want to give something to somebody that's obviously, I don't say well off, but they're not in as much of a need for it.
Yeah, for sure.
So like the equality one would be like all the citizens need to be treated equally, obviously. The maximum rule is like options chosen to be those that favor the worst off best, which would be it's at the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
So the last one, where'd it go? Oh, options chosen to be those that secure the greatest risk reduction per unit of resource input. What y'all think?
Yeah, I mean, so the question's asking combining them? Oh, and merging all 3 of them?
Yeah, so what issue is going to come up, if any, that would happen if you merged all 3 of those?
I mean, as much as like it'd be easier, for the maximum rule, like you're targeting the most vulnerable, and then the other one, it's like whatever benefits the greatest to society. I mean, sometimes they're not going to match up at all. And then, of course, you want to be equal, but then you have to take in consideration, the location, the amount of people effective, which I mean goes to the vulnerable, but still, even if you're aiming towards that, I mean, technically you can't be equal, I guess, throughout while doing the other 2 rules from the equality.
It's like a give and take kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it could go. Yeah, I think it could go like multiple ways, and I think like the implementation process is definitely what's gonna ground it. How is it's implemented. I think that's gonna play definitely a long role. And when you think about equality and then vulnerability and all that, I think they all, in a sense, they all go together for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And then discuss major issues an HSEM leaders might face with relation to public perception of fairness and transparency with the post-truth era video. Side note, I had to watch that video like 2-3 times because the first time I watched it, he moved so much. I was like, dude, still.
I kept posting like going back and going back.
I was like, you're kind of attractive to look at, but as soon as you opened your mouth, it was gone. You were just moving at that point.
Oh my god, dude.
I was like, is there a subtitle option? I'm like, no, we'll just rewind it.
Like some of the stuff that was typed that had errors in them, and I was like, am I reading this wrong or something? Oh boy. Let's see.
Yeah, but it was a good video overall. Yeah, I like the example you used with the X and then the ABC. And then of course the second one would like you have a predisposition of what the other people like said the answer was, and based off answers from that and then related it to the media and fake news and all those news outlooks, outsources. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Good news and bad news. Yeah. I would just can be totally distorted.
Those were
Mm-hmm.
I walked out of the room and came back in and there was arrows. I was like, I missed something. So like I think one of my favorite things that he said was the question of who will be the checker of the facts of the fact checkers, and it had to be you, is what he said. So and tying it back to the field, you've got somebody with a badge saying, well, this is what's happening, so this is what's going to happen. In place of that, are you just going to trust the word because they have a shiny badge or a fancy title? Or are you actually going to go not behind their back, but do your own research to see if that's actually what's the most beneficial?
Fact check.
Yeah, because I think he said like when they're basically like when you're doing the fact check, you should be looking for like consistency in the information and things like that. So like what keeps reoccurring in the information that you're gathering, supposing to like just what one person says doesn't apply, kind of stuff.
Yeah, and today it's definitely relatable about the vaccination example he gave.
Yeah,
about, like the outbreak of measles and chicken. I was just like, oh my gosh, like that's. It kind of made me mad a little bit, but at the same time, it's just like, why don't people vaccinate and see this huge problem?
Don't even make me started on that topic.
Okay. Talk about
But I totally agree because like I think like he mentioned like how basically information is no longer centralized in a sense, like it's not just one person that's busting information, right? So like there's the media trying to get information and filter out the fake news and things like that, and then disseminate what they do believe is the actual correct information. But then also you have people like us sitting at homes and stuff like that with our smartphones, we're on social media, we're just saying what just giving out our own news and stuff like that. So who's actually checking who's correct and stuff like that? Like just the example you provided, how somebody came about and said like one of his Facebook friends, I think, said something along the lines of, can't remember the country's name, like the word the GDP was decreasing and unemployment rate was going up. However, he went and did his own research and the reverse was the case and stuff like that. So basically people can just say anything on the social media, but is that actually correct? Like who's actually checking all of that to actually see? And I think that's where he goes into saying like people should be the fact checkers, like Killa mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to like the 3 problems from the last question. And then he did say that like fake news to real news was like 3 to 1, because then you run into the problem of something might be a piece of the real thing, but then they could take a little bitty thing of the real thing and then blow it out of proportion and to make it something that it's not. Hashtag anti-vaxxers. However.
Okay. Yeah, and then this also made me think about like the active shooter thing we did for Denims like 2 semesters ago.
That was a year ago, dude.
Yeah, that report for the like for the media and what to do, like the outstaging and like what to tell, what to release about victims, because that really matters, because it's the news that people like, I guess, thirst for, but it's something that really shouldn't be like in the news, but it is. Yeah, and the same thing like with like mass shootings, like they give out too many details, like the media, and then also I was like reading an article about research that it like makes other people like want to be like copycats. It puts that I'm not sure if the right word, but like this contagion, like, oh, like this is what they did, like they can do it. And
copycats, did you guys hear about that girl from, I don't know where she flew in, but she flew into Denver to try. She was like really basically obsessed with the Columbine kids.
I think I did hear about that.
Yeah, they found her dead, so I was like, good. The anniversary is in 2 days.
Oh wow. Oh yeah.
There's already been 20 years. I was like, what? But yeah, little side note, my bad.
No, that was good.
Okay, so There's 2 more questions in question 6. What strategies can they use in ensuring risk? Oh, denim. And crisis communications and or assessment and information diffusion and dissemination are more reliable. So basically, what strategies can they use to make everything more reliable?
And again, I think it goes back to like what the video is saying, like people need to be fact checkers, right? So just because somebody said something doesn't mean it is correct, right? And then people shouldn't always be more accepting all the time. People should say more, why, and ask more questions and stuff like that. Basically, question things that people say and actually go do the research for themselves to actually make sure that is correct. It's like just because someone comes out and be like, oh yeah, this is what happened, doesn't mean you should be like, oh great. Because then I think a good example that he did give was the one about how the teenagers in the village, Villas, I think was the name, started disseminating information about the presidential election that was absolutely fake news. And then he was, even though the website was actually brought down because they were trying to make money off of that, and it was totally fake news. He was very curious as to how many people's perception was actually changed by what they saw by reading that. So that was very important because then like that could definitely have a huge impact on how people see things and stuff like that. But then again, is that actually the right information or is that even correct? Did you actually go back to check it? Or did you just read something online and assume like it's correct because it's online? Just because something is out there doesn't mean it's correct in a sense.
Yeah, because he went into saying that the facts or just facts in general are social constructs. And then I kind of made a connection. I feel like that social media is the plague to those constructs and it just makes it into chaos and you just can't really figure out what was the actual truth in all of it.
Yeah, and as much as you'd like to stop, fake news, like it's pretty much impossible, especially just with how many people there are, and then just that what they want to know, what they want to tell, what they want people to believe. So I really agree like with him. I remember he said like 3 strategies, but I know like the one that I noted, which I thought was the most important, was question more and believe less. And then from that, just check multiple sources. You can believe things, but definitely check them, especially if they are seem like reliable.
Yeah, I mean, to some people, it might be disrespectful of why you're questioning them, and it can be taken off in a misconstruing way. But then at the same time, like if you do it, like he said, in a more positive manner and give people the benefit of the doubt and be like, well, are you sure about that?
Yeah.
Like, questioning their intelligence is not the way to go about that.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you're like, okay, well, what makes you say that? Okay, not with that face, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, I think that's very, and I think like stuff like that is also like things like we see like in our discussion forums and stuff like that within the class. Like how do you respond to people when you have a differing opinion and stuff like that. Even though you may think they're wrong or like they're wrong, how do you actually correct them without like in a positive manner in a sense, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example. I think about that in Bakers Online, because some people will just be like, one said it's just like, wait, where did you get your facts from? Like,
there's no citations, no references, no resources. And I'm just like over here with like that much in the blog, and I'm like, oh my god, how do I do this politely and academically correct?
Yeah. Sometimes you just want to like rant and like rampage, but like at the same time you can't because then that's going against not being like rude about it. Like,
hold on, a little
bit. Yeah, so it's hard, but
oh goodness.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's definitely important because I think also like another example he gave was how like the Facebook friend, how if something happens, do you just put it out there or do you take it over like to a closed? I think he said open there, but I think he meant closed, like basically take it to a closed conversation, so it's like just putting it out there for everyone to see you, correcting the person and stuff like that.
Okay, the last question. In what ways, I think, our post-truth era shifts perceptions about fair processes in your view? So to me, like the quote that the guy that he quoted at the very end of the video said that freedom is participation. So I mean, if you're participating in what we've been talking about this whole time and just like the fairness processes, then I feel like everything will, the truth will shine through at the end. Not to be cliche, but that's kind of what it just comes down to.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, absolutely. I think this perception actually can be, like changed or, like we talked about and things like that. Like, because then it's like, how do people actually know if something is correct or not? And I think like that goes back to, like people, like organizations that have built their reputation and stuff like that. So like there are news sources that so many people trust and like whatever they say goes, right? So that actually tells you like, when what happens if that organization was to publish something that is false? How do you know when they publish something that is false and stuff like that? So like that could actually change perceptions, but like again, you trust them and things like that. But there's so many scenarios and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I know I used to be really guilty about like, not to like bring up politics, but about politics, I hated basically everything about it. I knew like nothing about either side except for what I learned in school, but I forgot that quickly. And so I just would go off of like, looks and like around me who's like talking about who's the best candidate. But then like once you actually like do your research, I think that's a big thing about it too. You, like if you don't know anything about it, like really you can't really say much, And so for me, I just learned like participating and like knowing like the knowledge really helps. So
Oh yeah,
it really goes with pretty much anything.
oh yeah, absolutely. Like something I've noticed too, like when I watch the news and stuff like that, like to me, like the people that are brought on for the news, like these people have degrees and they have so much experience in that field and stuff like that. So they're brought on to interpret situations based on like their knowledge of their background and also what is actually happening and stuff like that. To me, yes, sometimes I think they could get subjective and add like their own personal touch to stuff. So like to me, I basically take the information and interpret it to myself basically. So I take the interpretation, but I don't create my perceptions based off of that basically. I try to make my own perception. I think like sometimes they try to give you the perception that you should be following, but I think that's wrong. I think you should basically just tell people what's going on and then let the perception be there. Like then let them perceive what they want in the way that they deem it fit based on the information that you have provided.
Yeah, it's like, here's all the information, take what you will and figure it out for yourself.
Exactly. Because then it's like you're giving them the information and then you're telling them what they should think about the information. Then to me, that's counterproductive. Why don't just skip the whole process and just tell them what to think?
Yeah, why don't we just become a dictator and be like, no, you're going to do this.
Right.
Oh boy.
Become communist.
Waco 2019.
Yeah.
Oh boy, sure. Our buddy's back.
And now it's done. She's just
you're a communist. It was like,
like I got another thing to say.
That's in check.
All right, guys. Do you got anything else to add?
No, I think we covered good basis.
Samuel.
Yep, we gotta go work on a lot of other stuff.
Okay. Well, it was really good meeting with you guys.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, same here. Absolutely, guys. It's been
we will cheer for you at graduation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would like that. Yeah. I'll cheer for you guys for here. Yeah, I'll definitely try. I'll definitely tune into that after work for sure. Yeah, 7 p.m. is a good time. So yeah, that works for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna turn it off.
Oh.
Okay.